Welcome everyone. I'm Barry Everett, President of the Society for Neuroscience, and I'm pleased to introduce this year's Dialogues Between Neuroscience and Society lecture. But first, I want to thank the international neuroscience community for joining this week to share in the excellent scientific program of SfN 2021, even though we can't be together in Chicago to connect in person. Next, I want to thank Elsevier for its generous support of this Dialogues lecture, which was created to explore the ways in which neuroscience intersects with the world around us. Elsevier has supported the Dialogue series since the first lecture in 2005. Before introducing our speaker, I will briefly announce a set of the 2021 awards that recognize excellence in research, mentoring, and other achievements in neuroscience. The Bernice Grafstein Award for Outstanding Achievements in Mentoring is awarded to Dr. Jill Becker. The Mika Salpeter Lifetime Achievement Award recipient is Dr. Catherine Dulac. The Janet Rosenberg True Batch Career Development Award goes jointly to Dr. Shane Lidlow and Dr. Lauren O'Connell. The Patricia Goldman Rakish Hall of Honor is awarded posthumously, and this year to Dr. Leslie Ungerleider. Congratulations to these 2021 awardees in honor of their research and mentoring of women in neuroscience. And I warmly invite you to watch videos on this meeting platform and on the SfN website, where you can learn more about the awards and recipients. And now to the Dialogues lecture. And our Dialogues guest is Sandro Kereselidze. Sandro is the founder and Chief Creative Officer of ARTECHOUSE, an innovative company producing, presenting, and operating experiential technology-driven art exhibitions and immersive spaces. Sandro's groundbreaking vision of redefining the way art is experienced today and creating a supportive ecosystem for the future of art has set the company apart as a pioneer in the field of experiential technology-driven art. In 4 years, ARTECHOUSE has produced and created over 25 truly impressive immersive art exhibitions, 10 audiovisual live performances, and 140 augmented virtual and mixed reality experiences, attracting over 1.3 million visitors and captivating a global audience. Sandro will discuss the recent collaboration between ARTECHOUSE and SfN, partly to celebrate its 50th anniversary, to produce the Life of a Neuron exhibit. This is an immersive animation that transports its audience into the cerebral cortex by melding cutting-edge science and art to illuminate the life experience of the brain's 86 billion neurons. It shows how technology-driven storytelling can bridge the gap between art and science. After Sandro tells us more about this collaboration and ARTECHOUSE, we will be in conversation with Dr. John Morrison, Professor of Neurology at UC Davis and Director and Core Scientist of the California National Primate Research Center, who served as the lead scientist on the Life of a Neuron project, and Ricky Kim, ARTECHOUSE's Executive Creative Director, who played a major role in bringing this project to life. But first, let's hear from Sandro.
Welcome to ARTECHOUSE. We are an innovative art space dedicated to the art, science, and technology. I will tell you more about us, about me, and why I'm talking to you today. Of course, we were all hoping that we all get together in person and celebrate 50-year anniversary of neuroscience. The hope was to me be on the stage as a speaker and talking to you about myself, about what we have done these past 3 years, about what I've been working on this past 5 years, and technically throughout all my life and career. So, who am I? My name is Sandro. I grew up in the country of Georgia, Tbilisi, the country of incredible wine, culture, art, and great place to visit. But I wanted to tell you a little bit also about my family and where I'm coming from. coming from 6th generation of artists. Sometimes I joke, I wish I had some scientists or doctors or lawyers in my family, but anyone that I knew and anyone that I have heard of, the blood related to me, are artists. From poets to performers to fine artists and movie directors, actors, and you name it, any form of art. But living today and having all this DNA in my blood and being so close to the culture and art was giving me a lot of questions. What 21st century art will look like, and what is 21st century art? What are the tools are being used for storytelling in 21st century? More I learned and more I educated myself, I discovered in my research that a lot of artists living today using technology as a primary medium for storytelling. Me and my wife, Tati, start really thinking to create a home for this medium of art, because many artists that I met throughout this period, they all brought up one challenge in their field. They had no home for their art. We were looking for all over the town in DC, a place where we can call home. And in 2015, we found this place that actually serendipitously was built in 1994, the same year that I arrived to Washington, DC. This place was built for arts and culture, but never been occupied. It was never been used. And it was kind of serendipity in a way that we activated with the 21st century art. And we called it ARTECHOUSE, the home for arts and technology. The home for 21st century artists and audience. And I can tell you more as you follow me. We opened our first location here in 2017. We able to create 25 groundbreaking exhibitions, blockbuster exhibitions, all created through technology. And the art that we're creating, it's not something that you can be just passively viewing. You have to experience it. It's experiential art. It's something that you need to connect to. We opened our second location in Miami, and a year later, in 2019, we opened our New York location. We were in the plans to open a lot more, but as we all know, 2020 struck and a lot of plans got changed. So we continue on working on incredible projects. Now we continue opening more locations, and hopefully we'll be near you soon. When we opened our location, our mission was always to inspire, educate, and empower the creation of new experiential art. And our goal was always to stimulate appreciation of possibilities in art, science, and technology. That's why the project that we've been working so hard this past 3 years, that become so dear to our hearts, is something that we've been waiting for all this time. So let me show you what we've been working on. Welcome to 21st century storytelling. This is the beginning of art, science, and technology. It starts here. True data of human neuron. Human neuron makes us who we are. The neurons are our thinking cells. They are creating our experiences. And what's groundbreaking about this exhibit is that today we can experience what we're experiencing in our heads, in our brains. We make audience dive into the real human neuron with the help of technology. Same technology that artists using today to create stories like this, to create visuals like this to life. We were not able to create what you see behind me if we had not had accessibility to the real neuron data. Thanks to scientists, and again, thanks to technology that scientists are using, we're able to collect that data and able to tell the story of a neuron. The true innovation, the true experience of the science. What's unique about this collaboration is that we artists respected the science. We closely worked on every detail with the science. We were able to create 7 chapters that tells the universal story of ourselves. Of course, the incredible visuals that come to life with the help of 3D model of the human neuron. It tells actually the whole story from the pre-birth to the death with the sounds that we are experiencing throughout our lives. From babies crying to us going to the school, experiencing our teenager life, adulthood, and all the way to the death. We've been hearing so many sounds around us throughout our lives that each time, every day affects our brain. And we added this incredible creation of the sounds, mixture of all of these sounds together to tell that universal story. The story that you cannot technically locate where it is or whose story it is. It's our story. It's a human story. And it's a human story of what makes us special and unique in our brains. And this is neurons doing that. So what you see behind me is a true visualization of human neuron science. And this is the beginning of experience science through neuroscience. It's the beginning of experiencing from experience. It's the beginning of experiencing things that makes us who we are. Those millions of neurons that makes us who we are. It's a beautiful experience, and I'm so proud of, and I'm so honored to be able to stand here, to be able to create this with incredible team that ARTECHOUSE and SfN put it together for this project. This is the future of the storytelling. This is the beginning I hope, at least, of true collaboration between science and artists. A true storytelling for 21st century audience. My hopes are that the next generation will be inspired by neuroscience in an absolutely new way. And this is the end. This is the last moment of the neuron. This is something that we all gonna be experiencing. This is something that the part of our lives that none of us escaping. But one thing that us all humans live for, and hopefully we leave some legacy behind, and we leave something good behind for the next generation. So I hope with this installation, it's a milestone and the beginning of something very, very beautiful, and something that the next generation will cherish. And we have incredible future that we hope we all gonna share together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandro. That was absolutely fantastic. And I think now we really need to go into a dialogue where we can delve a little further into what it took to bring the life of a neuron to fruition. And perhaps I could begin actually by asking a question to John. I've heard you talk many times over the years, John, about how one of your fantasies was to get inside a neuron and have a 3D actualization of a neuron. You'd wanted to visualize it and then experience it. And I'm just wondering how this amazing project that and the video we've just seen aligned with what you had in mind. Is it anything like what you had in mind?
Oh, it's beyond what I had in mind. So I think the first time I saw a virtual reality cave, Barry, many years ago, my first thought was, I want to be able to walk through a neuron in a virtual reality cave. So when we were launching the virtual brain project for brainfacts.org at SfN in 2017, I finished my speech by turning to Marty and saying, Marty, the next thing we're going to do is develop a virtual neuron that you can walk through, watch it mature, watch it age, watch it get diseased, watch it heal. And it's going to be a real human neuron that's quantitatively accurate, that we assemble through microscopy and computer graphics and AI. And Marty took it seriously and started to put the wheels in motion for the Neuron Project, which is what we called it at that time. Of course, it was much harder than we thought it was going to be. It was much harder than the Brain Project. And I don't think it ever would have succeeded if we hadn't found our partners, ARTECHOUSE. To tell you the truth, I still can't believe it worked. But we delivered the neuron to ARTECHOUSE, and I'll talk about that a little later, and they brought it to life. So now we have this. We have the life of a neuron, and it's built around this real human neuron. So we can have it mature, we can have it communicate with other neurons, we can have circuits form, we can have it react to stress, we can have it react to hormones, we can have it learn, forget, get sick, heal, and die. And even this exhibit has some of that, but I think we'll build even more of that into it as we go forward.
Thanks, John. So maybe, I mean, you referred to it just quickly in passing then. I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about the scientific team that you had to put together to bring this to fruition. I mean, you just said, you know, this is a human neuron. So first question, how in hell's name do you get hold of a human neuron, and how do you deliver it like this? So can you just say about the team that worked behind the scenes with this?
Yeah, just an absolutely spectacular team. And every time I get involved in something like this, I realize that you have to have a great team. In this case, it was a team of teams, ARTECHOUSE, SfN, and the neurobiology team. So the core neurobiology team was 5 of us: me, Danny Dimitriou, Bill Jansen, Matt Wimsatt, and Corrado Cali. There were also other people that worked on it, that worked on the side exhibits: Eric Nestler, Bob Wirtz, Patrick Hoff, Bevel Conway, and Kristen Anderson worked on the storyline and also worked on those side exhibits. But that core team had to build the neuron. And I felt that it had to be a human neuron right from the start. I was very committed to that. And Patrick Hoff and I, for years now, have been working on reconstructing human neurons from surgical biopsy material. And we worked with the same team on some of those efforts. So we had to have a real neuron, but we also had, when we have done this in the past in animal models, we inject the neuron with a fluorescent dye. We reconstruct it on the confocal microscope. The entire neuron takes, of course, 10,000 images that are then weaved together. But we had to move that technology to the human neuron, and we had to get internal organelles as well. I wanted to be able to deliver the artists a real neuron in 3D, but I didn't want it to be empty. So the hard part was, once we had the neuron filled and reconstructed in all its beauty, we had to take a different reconstruction from the electron microscopy, different neuron, different tissue, but the same type of neuron. By the way, these are prefrontal neurons from the human cortex. And we did a 3D reconstruction in the EM with the help of Zeiss and Vimal Gangadharan. And then we had to take that 3D reconstruction that we did with EM and put it inside the neuron. And we also reconstructed a synapse because we wanted the internal organelles of a synapse. So, and that's where Corrado Cali was the EM expert and Matt Wimsatt was the visualization and 3D expert. And they just developed a way to do this. I'm not even sure anybody's done it before. And normally you would work with these data sets independently and take whatever data you can get from them. But we had to put them back together because we had to give it to the artists. So what we delivered to the artist was a 3D reconstruction that had some of these internal elements. And then they went to town with it and actually did various manipulations that suggested the kind of movement in the synapse and in the soma that we had anticipated. So I really wasn't sure this was going to work. I remember the day I said to the team, this is what we're going to have to do. We'd never done it, but this team was one of the greatest teams I've ever worked with, and we managed to do it.
Sounds absolutely incredible. So then, Sandro and Ricky, so there's all of this reconstruction, anatomical reconstruction of a neuron going on in the background, and then it's delivered to you in some form. So then we come to the process of translating scientific concepts and words and narrative. And I just wonder how you approach this with the artists. And obviously there are a number of artists involved. Maybe you can say something about them and how you convey to them how to move this into a domain where it's visually appealing and compelling for the public, perhaps many of whom don't have any scientific background at all. I mean, how did you approach that, and how did you bring that to fruition?
I want to talk about the RFQ part to start with. So we actually started with the side exhibits, bring that together first, because we basically put out put together a request for proposal to a very set number of artists that we knew who could comprehend complex concepts and can work with scientific data. And in order to put that request for proposal, we had a number of meetings with each of these lead scientists that John mentioned for each of the topics that we chose with SfN that were deemed important outside of the storyline that we chose to tell of the life of a neuron, which was the main story. And we put together a concise, not a one-pager, but that's something that was close to a one-pager that was as simple as possible that we could put it into for stress, addiction, and vision. And then we put it out to a very specific number of artists who we felt could understand and can respect the science as is. And from the number of the proposals that we got, we discussed those proposal concepts with the scientist, and then from there, Sandra and I went through what we thought was the strongest artist and the piece or the concept, and then that was how we developed further with the scientists the pieces from the side pieces. But we have many conversation with the scientist, and within these concepts and back and forth of looking at these proposals and artist concepts and how they applied science and how they interpreted the information, both SfN and ARTECHOUSE realized that they needed to be also something called guiding questions from the very beginning that we have to stick to in order to make sure that the art is not pseudoscience. There is an actual science behind it, but also there is some artistic freedom to it. I can speak about this guiding questions that we basically pose to all the artists to make sure that they stick to the science as is, but also they have the artistic freedom to do so. And this came from the many hours of conversations that we had with all the scientists, and also the weekly meetings we had for the reconstruction of the 3D neurons. And these were, for example, what are the most essential components of the scientific concept? How can art be used to demonstrate a concept in a way that a text cannot fully appreciate? How does the art correctly represent or utilize the science? How does the inclusion of an idea contribute to the framework of a life story? What are the most important takeaway message of this concept? How does the art further the understanding of the science? And how does the art piece celebrate and highlight the science? So these were our guiding questions to make sure all of the pieces were highlighting what each piece was meant to be. So as it was being developed, it doesn't stray away from its original intent.
Great, thanks, Ricky. Sandro, there's something you want to add to that? I mean, evocative description. I mean, when you talk about weekly meetings and a period of a couple of years, this is intense, really intense. Sandro.
Yeah, truly. I think it was what's fascinating about this whole collaboration is really truly working together to create something that tells the story and tells the story in a scientific way and correctly, and also artistically, and also be able to create something that it's in a way digestible for a regular audience that potentially going to be inspired by experiencing this. I think the close collaboration was definitely groundbreaking in this case, that showed a possibility for the future, something that I think in some ways the art and science able to, in this period of time, kind of being separate fields for longest time. And because of today and because of the technologies that we're both using on both sides, we're able to truly emerge these two fields and tell the story. Artists, we are storytellers, and we need this type of information and incredible data that science is able to give us in this case, and accessibility to this type of research, right? I think it's a milestone, in my opinion, at the beginning of something that is very unique and true to 21st century expression.
And I mean, for the main exhibit, it's quite clear that you've honed in on life stages, and that I think there are half a dozen of them. And maybe between you, John, you could tell us why you were motivated to kind of define those 6 life stages. But then an equally intriguing question, Ricky and Sandro, how does those stages then get your creative process, how those get translated into the immersive exhibit itself? So John first, why those life stages? What was behind that?
So there were so many hours of discussion about this because Ricky insisted that there be a story here, not just visualization, but a story. And it took me a while to appreciate what she was saying. And of course, she was right. And the story was the life of the neuron. And so we had to develop that. And that took a long time. And we had to educate initially Ricky and Sandro, and then some of the artists on what happens. What's the difference between a neuron in the fetus and an infant, et cetera. So the stages that we thought about were the fetus, the infant, the child, the adolescent, the adult, and the aged neuron. And so I remember the conversations we had to say, well, you know, in the fetus, the neurons are migrating. They're still migrating. The actual neurons are moving. And in the infant, there's all kinds of spine plasticity. Spines are coming and going. Synapses are coming and going. And then the adolescent, there's an enormous amount of neural activity. In the adult, there's some stability. And in the aged human, you can have an AD-like neuron death. They did all that with the art. We gave them basically one neuron. Now, they also had some 2D Golgi images that they worked with, that they weave into this. But it was really the artist that expressed this migration, the plasticity, the stability, the activity, and then death. You would have thought we gave them 1,000 neurons from 6 different life stages, but we didn't. We gave them one neuron, and they had these 2D Golgi reconstructions. So this is what really blew me away when I saw the exhibit at the opening, that they actually managed to artistically express the different levels of activity and the different events that are going on at different stages of life.
So I think being past, a neuron, Ricky and Sandra, I think over here in rugby, we'd call that a hospital pass, because then you've got this thing and suddenly you have to become, I imagine, pretty conversant with neuroscientific and cellular concepts. And then you began this process of creating these stages. So I really want to hear about that, how you picked up these individual stages and then began to animate them, and of course provide this engaging soundtrack as well. So perhaps you can just lead us into that. How did that happen? How did it work? Where did you start?
We actually started with the Brain Facts, the book that SfN brought to us, and in the contents, if you see, it's from chapter 6 through 9. Where it's from the developing brain, infant, child, and adolescent brain, adult and aging brain. And those read exactly like a life story that everybody goes through, that is universal. So taking that as a skeleton, we divided into pre-birth, where such thing as migration is happening, like in fetus, and then birth, development, adolescent, adult, and aging and dying. And we then cycle that as a circle of life.
I think there's something truly wonderful about that. And I think probably especially wonderful for John, because he was a former editor, that the Brain Facts booklet gave Ricky and you the narrative framework in which to produce this wonderful exhibit. And I think everyone at SfN is going to treasure that, because Brain Facts is a major accomplishment for the society.
That sort of was the spark of the concept. But there are very complex ideas that is explained in words, but there's no visuals to it. And that was the most challenging part. I mean, they're very evocative words, like the story, like, simple cell, like like for example, a fetus or a neuron starts as a simple cell like any other, but there isn't a visual example of that. So we need to make up those visuals. Or the neuron is formed from a vacuum. Those are our cues. Okay, how do you design that? What does it look like? And so we were given a lot of research papers, and we were given a lot of so-called dry text to read from. Here's an example. There's an example of this. But for visual artists, we're looking for visual examples, which there aren't a lot. So you try to identify key adjectives and key verbs, and then and simulate what those might look like based on a lot of microscopic images that doesn't have animation or doesn't have color, or there isn't a lot of images of. And with the help of John and Kristen, we also put together a lot of information as much as possible. So what happens in birth, what happens in development, what happens like in adulthood. Like adulthood, we try to put in information such as what happens when you sleep, in the resting brain, when you exercise. Like those things were all in adulthood. And like aging was a little bit easier to visualize, as there were a lot of verbs that were familiar in simulation. And colors, we discussed like simpler colors, like the cues were such as in birth, you can't see a lot of color. Our visions are not developed. So, okay, black and white. And as a child, like infant, you only can see very limited amount of colors. Okay, so we use limited amount of colors. And development, how does childhood feel like? So those are actually, we took those cues and developed these color palettes as well. And so that's how we visualized it and tried to get cues from all the materials that we got, and develop on top of that, and to get what we have at the moment. And Sandro can speak about the musical development and all the sound effects that tells a story on top of the visuals.
I mean, and the sound effects are intriguing, because when I first listened, I suddenly realized I was listening to what sounded like a baby. Yeah. And then in a later clip, there are obvious young kids or adolescents shouting and running around, and the colors are going from yellow to purple. So Sandro, tell us about the sound, because it wasn't just the soundtrack itself, it was these overlays of real life sounds.
Correct. Yeah, I think sound definitely played a huge element, just also for experience. I think it's very important. From the beginning, I think, me growing up in a family of movie directors, when I saw this concept, I was like, this is like almost a film you can create, and you can create the story of this human, and but then how can you create the story how can you make it universal, right? How can you create something that we can all be related to, and you can identify the race or where is located, location, or it's a female or male. I think it was a challenge, but it was also interesting challenge. How can we tell the story with the beautiful images that the designer is able to create? But now we have fantastic images, and it looks great. But how can we add another layer, which is, I think, what fascinated me from the beginning of our meetings with Dr. Morrison, is that how sound makes incredible effect on our brain. And when I heard that, I right away for me was remembering how my dad, movie director, he made 65 movies, and all of his movies with the incredible soundtracks. And I was always wondering, he always told me that the music is the sound is the key role for storytelling, and most memorable thing to remember after the experiencing. And it is true, and it was fascinating to learn that how much sound really affects our brain and our experience overall. and how much soundtrack that we, throughout our lives, able to listen, right, to from the streets that we walking, or from the high school that we growing up or learning things, and those periods of life has their own soundtracks in a way. So we able to create a narrative and tell the story from the childhood to all the way to the death, supported with the incredible soundscapes. So it was storytelling throughout the sound, but it's also visualization of something that is happening inside of our brain. So it's just, yeah, for experiential standpoint, it definitely takes the visitor to the next level of emotional connection.
I mean, John, I've seen a couple of videos of you inside the exhibit when you saw it actually for the first time, just I think a couple of weeks ago from now, and I kept hearing you say things like "wow" or "this is awesome." Maybe you can, for us, just comment on what Sandro just said, and because this sound experience must have been a complete surprise to you. So how did the sound convey your experience of the neuronal stages when you were in it?
Yeah, it's such an important question, Barry. So I had been totally immersed in the visual part of this exhibit. I had never even thought about the sound. And so my first reaction when I was in there was just the power and beauty, visual beauty of the exhibit. And I had this sense of, oh my gosh, look what they did with our neuron. And then I started to pay more attention to the sound. And I started to appreciate that our neurons were processing what they did visually with the neuron and the soundtrack. And I started to think about how good we are, how good the human brain is at multimodal processing, that we take for granted that we are putting the sound and the vision together and creating an emotional response. And I spoke to Sandro afterwards when we were at dinner, and he was so excited because that's exactly what he wanted to do. And he did it. So that was, I went from this visual impression, the beauty of what they did, to the whole overwhelming sound, and then putting the two together and then recognizing the emotion that the whole thing conveyed. I also was very struck by the side exhibits, which I think are very, very important. They make the point very, very well. For instance, the vision exhibit that you don't really see with your eyes. Everybody thinks you see with your eyes. Well, yeah, of course you need your eyes, but you see with the 30% of the neocortex that's dedicated to visual processing. And that's all neurons, synapses, and circuits. So I'm hoping that the public starts to appreciate that they have this amazing capacity to integrate modalities and superimpose emotion on what they're seeing and hearing. But also, it's really all done with neurons, circuits, and synapses. So I'm hoping that people when they tend to take for granted the amazing complexity of their visual world, well, maybe now they'll realize that it comes down to this cellular and synaptic level. At least that's what people have told me that they take away from it. And that also when they think about the extraordinary complexity of their visual world and the emotion that music evokes and our abilities to combine all these elements and memories, and that they'll realize, oh my God, it's really those neurons that are in my brain that are allowing me to appreciate all this. So I don't know if I'm expressing that as clearly as I'd like to, but that's what I'm hoping people take away from it. And I think also that this kind of multimodal exhibit is probably a fantastic teaching tool for public information around neuroscience. And I think it's the future. of teaching the public about neuroscience and science in general.
And of course, there is something very clever. Well, actually, there's lots of things that are very clever in this exhibition, but in the vision side exhibit, there's actually the capacity to detect the movement of someone moving inside the exhibit, and that's translated into their direction, kind of motion detection cells in the cortex.
Right.
So where did that idea come from? Was that Sandro and Ricky?
That was the artist. That was the artist.
Oh, the artist did that.
Yeah, her many hours of conversation with Bob and Bevel, and her learning of vision, how the vision works, and how it wants to be artistically translated into an experience that's immersive yet accurate. It came from that, and the artist actually works with a lot of sensors, different types of sensors. She's known for that. So she integrated in one of her specialties into the retina, and integrated into the screens and other parts of the exhibit, into how they actually try to, in a simplified way, but to sort of demonstrate how our eye actually works.
Yeah, so this may be an opportunity to say a little bit about how the science fed into the side exhibits. Bob Wirtz and Bevel Conway were the vision experts that communicated the science of vision, and then the artists took off from there. Eric Nestler did the addiction, the science behind the addiction side exhibit, and Danny Dimitri and I did the science behind the stress exhibit. And we delivered a fairly factual scientific write-up of each of these three areas. And then again, just like the main exhibit, the artists took off from there. And what's interesting is the vision side exhibit is probably the most literal, and the addiction and the stress side exhibits are the most artistically expressive. And that's pretty much how you see the brain. The brain is still a bit of a mystery with addiction and stress responses, but what we really understand, vision.
Mm.
And of course, I'm interested in addiction, and I'm sure you got fantastic information from Eric Nestler. I think many people who would have thought about that initially, John, would have thought, yes, addiction, drug reward, superactivity of dopamine neurons in the brain. But this portrayal of addiction is actually much more on the dark side of that, with the neurons not looking too happy. And of course, we know that in addiction, neurons in the cortex actually shrink and change, and we may lose some of them. So what was your emotional intent, Ricky and Sandro, in taking that scientific fact and translating it into that very evocative side exhibit?
I mean, that was also, we let the artist choose the concept and the intention and the sort of their take on the scientific literature that we provide for every artist that takes the topic. And Dr. Nestler provided helped us develop the literature that everybody read, and it was heavily regarding chemicals and regarding the neurotransmitter reactions and the dopamine, like all of this little very, very scientific, as John said, very scientific literature that about how addiction works, and the artist's reaction to that, and how to translate that was this concept regarding the imposter. That's the name of the piece. And how to translate that into public experience, and so to him the best way to express that in the space, because also all of the art that you see in this space is designed to the space, right? Like, so they're all what's called in situ. So how it's not just about what looks good as is, but it's also what looks good and in its best experience in the space that's given. So in that space, he decided that what would be great is for each public, like it will make a big impact if the public can experience if the public can be the effect of the drug. So if you are a drug, what is the effect in the neurons? So to make it's so you make an impact, right? You kind of make a visual impact of the negative effects of the drug, of the addiction. So that was where that sort of whole the visual comes from.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it is an interactive, it's a real-time piece, it's a real-time interactive piece. So the more people there are in the space, the more intense the visuals become. Also, it's programmed so that you are also able to see the stages of the addiction. So you can see the lower, the less more mild stage. I think there's like 7 or 8 stages of addiction. And the visuals get more intense, and so the neuron, the image of the neuron, and it actually uses the same the 3D object that the 3D neuron that is used in the main story. It gets more distorted as there are more people, which is a stand-in for a drug, is in the space.
So, I mean, that is really evocative, but you're touching on something now which has also intrigued me about this. So we've heard the story about how the scientific endeavor was kind of given to you and then the artistic endeavor took over. At what point do you start, or did you start thinking about your audience, the goal of this? So when do you start thinking about, well, how is that going to be experienced by the audience that comes in off the street to look at it? And what am I trying to give them? Because that's another side to this production of an ARTECHOUSE exhibition like this, immersive exhibition like this. And I think that's a question to both of you, actually, Ricky and Sandro. At what point do you think about the audience that's coming in and what you're trying to enable them to leave with after they've been there?
I mean, John had a good point one day. Like, I can't remember exactly what John said, but he might need to reiterate or try to remember what he explained. But he explained something about how his wife listens into his Zoom calls and it's all gibberish to her. So to her, like, all these details don't matter. What really matters is like the highlights of the concepts. And because what bores the public are these like details that all the scientists are so obsessed about. So like to be honest, like that's what the public don't really want to listen, like hear about, like the details that we're obsessed about. So like you have to figure out what you think is interesting, is basically one time what John like said. So like so like he used his wife as an example. And so, but also, so like, as an ARTECHOUSE was it had to be a bridge between the artist and the SfN and the scientist, in that we have to make sure the artists are just not making something pretty and cool, but also being like John's wife, in that we're also not obsessed about the details that all the scientists want to put in there, because then it's going to just be gibberish to the public. That it's too dry, and I mean, I know Sandra has a very good sense of what the public would want to experience. So this is where the collaboration is very important, since if you have too many conversations with the same people, a lot of times you also get into too much of the details and the weeds. Like, oh, I want to put all of that details in, because you get very fond of those details. You want those details to be in there, and so that's why we have a team, and those people you trust to make sure they make those good decisions that the public will respond to, but at the same time will not miss those important aesthetical decisions and the scientific decisions.
Well, yeah, I just hope John's wife turns up on the credits.
You can't wait to see it.
Sandro, you were about to say something.
Yeah, no, sorry. Just to add to this, I think accessibility is the right probably description, is to make sure that it is, our core mission in ARTECHOUSE is to educate, empower, and inspire the visitors that come into our door. So, to us was very important to make sure that, like Ricky said, we don't overwhelm with a lot of information, and we also don't create something eye candy, but really something that leaves the imagination, leaves the room for the imagination, leaves the room for curiosity, leaves the room for the questions. I think that's something, it's organic, it's natural. It's something that, I think maybe the future of education, the way that, we give audience enough for them to be curious. If they're not curious, then they will not research, right? If they are curious, they actually can go down to the research and can layer and define incredible layers. And I think what's something fascinating with the technologies that we're using to create these stories is this capability to make audience be a part of these installations. So it's not just a passive viewing, but you have to participate, you have to interact, you have to be a part of it, you have to engage to it to be able to discover more information, to discover the curiosities, to discover that questions that we all have, and especially telling the very complex story of the brain. I think, we learn as we go. I think what's very beautiful and incredible about this exhibit is that the next generation of the neuroscientists might be walking and experiencing today something that they're going to be inspired by, and next generation of artists that wanted to use the technology as a medium to express themselves, right? So it's, you have to leave the curiosity, you have to leave that the magic moment. What happened in this actually collaboration, right, where we always created something that we, even from ARTECHOUSE, we were, we were, until the last minute, I think Dr. Morrison walked in, we were very nervous to make sure that it is delivered in this wow moment. But at the same time, it's not just a wow moment, but it opens the dialogue, leaves the communication, leaves the discovering, and leaves that communication between these two incredible art and scientists that coming together to tell this story, right, and to the public. I think, yeah, it's just living that curiosity and having that accessibility is definitely key in this case.
Thanks, Sandro. I mean, clearly, inspiring curiosity and interest in neuroscience has got to be, a great hope and expectation for the life of Neuron and the people that watch it. Well, for sure, just seeing it as we have today, I'm already completely drawn into this. So I'm actually quite desperate to be there and experience it in person. I hope that's gonna happen soon. But I think we're probably coming to an end of this dialogue now, and I want to thank you all, Ricky and Sandro and John, for all of the work, and the scientists and artists that were involved in this collaboration, to have produced something so memorable, and I'm absolutely sure so enduring and so compelling, both visually and orally. And I know we could carry on and on discussing this, but it's all we have time for today. So thank you all for joining in this dialogue, and congratulations on bringing an amazing project to such a wonderful fruition.
Thanks.
Thank
Barry.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for the incredible opportunity.